Welcome back. Today I'm going to be covering basics of using Desmos. Um, and the reason I'm doing that is because Desmos is one of the biggest advantages you could have on the digital SAT, right? You can pretty much solve anything if you know how to use it properly, right? Now, the key thing to realize is that it's not fastest every single time, right? Like sometimes you might have like a one-step calculation or an obvious pattern that actually might be quicker, but still, it's really important to know, especially if you're trying to aim for like 750 plus or even 800, right? So let's get started, right? I'm just going to go over the very basics specifically in this video, but I am going to post future ones where I cover more specific stuff, right? So the first thing I'm going to go over is just getting to know this entire Desmos interface. And here, right, you're going to see these boxes, right? Um, each numbered row here, right, is an expression line, so you can put an equation or a calculation on each line, right? And what I also like about this is that it's very clear, so you can know when you make typing mistakes, right? So let's put a simple linear equation, right? So once again, right, of course, it graphs it on the right side here. Um, Now when you're intending to plot functions or for plot graphs, use X and Y, of course, right? Because it treats most other letters as constants, which can create sliders, right? So for example, if you kind of use A here, and if you're trying to graph something, right, it's not going to show up, right? Because A is a constant and it has a slider instead. So once again, right, if you're graphing, use X and Y. Now sometimes, let's say you're looking at a graph, right? And you zoom out and you don't mean to be in the specific section of the graph. If you want to go back to your original workspace, click that home button and it'll bring you back, right? And the home button was on the top right, right? So once again, just clicking that home button kind of resets the entire graph, right? Centers it. So that's essentially it, right? Now, here's the thing. You can also have multiple functions, of course, right? Because there's multiple lines, and this is really useful for specific types of questions, right? Where you have to solve for a specific value, like the intersection. But that's pretty much it for getting to know your workspace at least, right? Now, Desmos can graph many equations directly, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say you have equation like 2y minus 4x equals 8, right? You do not need to solve for y first, right? You can literally just plot the graph for you, which is very convenient, right? So once again, you do not need to solve for y first. So if you're given a graph and you're trying to plot it, you can just pretty much enter it on Desmos and it will give you the graph itself, right? It's pretty convenient. The other thing also, right? Remember that Desmos follows the same order of operations as the SAT, right? So for example, if you typed in -3 squared, right? That would give you -9. But that's different from if you do -3 squared in parentheses and then square the entire thing, right? So once again, be aware of the fact that the order of operations works the same way as it does on the SAT. So again, those are just some very fundamental things that about Desmos that you should just know, um, just in general, right? Okay, so now we're gonna talk about grouping the entire quantity. What do I mean by that? Well, this is really similar to just what I talked about, like order of operations. So let's say you're typing something like 4 plus 5, right, divided by 3 squared, right? Well, now, what I intended to type was actually 4 plus 5 on the top, right? But that's not what showed up, right? So essentially, to kind of fix that issue, right, what I do a lot of the times is just use parentheses like 4 plus 5 and then divide by a specific number, right? That keeps the entire numerator on top without creating less room for mistakes that you might make when you're going pretty fast, right? So again, these are some very really basic things that you should just know, right? Same thing, like let's say you're trying to solve an exponent, question, and you don't want, of course, you don't want to solve it. So you use Desmos. So if you want to do 5 to the 1 plus 4 power, right? Once again, you'll notice that the 4 is added after the 5x exponentiated, right? So all you got to do, right, and this is what I do, is add parentheses, right? And that signals like, hey, you're trying to solve 5 to the 5th instead of 5 to the 1st plus 4, right? So again, keep in mind those kind of things, right? So, and sometimes, right, if you do get like a wrong answer, just look at your answer choices, and if you if it looks very strange, just compare it. Just look back to what you typed in, and sometimes you'll know that okay, maybe I just made a typing mistake, right? So once again, this is pretty cool what Desmos can do. But just again, use parentheses when you're trying to type in expressions in a numerator, or for fractions, or for exponents, right? The other cool thing that Desmos can do is give you the exact decimal answer, right? So let's say you type in the square root of 100 over 49, right? There are two things. First, if your answer choices are a fraction, right, you can press the fraction button and it will convert that into a fraction for you. The other thing is it can also give you the exact decimal value, right? Some questions ask you to find the answer choice in terms of fraction. So you click that fraction button, you get 10 over 7, gets the job done, right? Makes it pretty simple for you. So that's kind of what my entire topic explanation was for whole graph the whole quantity, right? Um, Key things to realize that parentheses preserve complete numerators, right? So once again, use parentheses when you're typing stuff like, if you're intending uh, 4 plus 5 to be on the top, right? It's pretty useful and pretty important, right? Okay, so now the most important and probably my most favorite thing about using Desmos is that you can define a function, and not only can you define a function, but you can also evaluate it, right? So let's say you have a function f of x given in a problem, and I'm just making something up, but this is actually good use of using parentheses, right? So let's say you have x squared plus 7 on the top, and then you're dividing by something like x minus 2, right? So your top is a exponential, or it's a quadratic, and your bottom is a linear function, right? So now, right, of course, you're going to see the graph of the function given on the right side. But the cool thing is, let's say you're trying to find a specific value of the function at a specific x value, right? So what you're going to do is just type in f of and whatever that value might be. So let's say I'm trying to find f of 5. Well, pretty simple, right? It gives you the value, right? 10.6, essentially, right? And once again, if you want to see a fraction answer, you can convert it to a fraction, right? 32 over 3. So that's again pretty cool, right? You can enter a function, and after that, you can evaluate it by saying f of whatever the x value you want to evaluate. Okay, now, right, what is another use case of Desmos? And this is kind of one I covered a bit earlier already, but it's using Desmos to find the solution to a system, right? So, for example, right, say you have the graph y equals 2x plus 1, right? And if you're trying to find the intersection of y equals 2x plus 1 and y equals 7, well, it's pretty simple, right? You graph those two equations on separate rows, and the intersection is going to be highlighted there, right? So again, this is pretty useful to know, especially when you have the system of equations, um, which you could solve manually, but it would just take more time, so you could just use decimals instead, right? So once again, right, you can graph multiple equations and find their intersection using Desmos, which is again pretty convenient, right? Oh, and also, whenever you are asked system of equation questions, right, make sure you actually read what the question is asking for. So the intersection here is 3 comma 7, but the question might ask you for the x value, right, of the intersection. So you will say 3 in this case, right? So the common mistake is that you report the y coordinate instead, right? So make sure you always look back to the question to see what it's actually asking, right? Okay, so the other thing you can do, um, and this one I actually use a lot specifically, um, is you can make a table, right? You can organize data in a table. And how you do that? Well, you see this plus icon in the top left, right? And then you press table, right? It's pretty simple. So the table stores the matching exit values in rows, right? So how do you even use these types of things? Well, you can, let's say you have the point 0, comma 2, right? You would enter it like that. 0 is the x coordinate, 2 is the y coordinate. Let's say you can enter multiple values, right? So let's say you have a 1, comma 5, right, as your other one, and like 2, comma 8, right? So you follow these you plot these points, and you're gonna see, well, yeah, this looks like a line, right? And you can determine things like that. And what's even more cool is that you can click that line button and have a linear regression so that you can actually find the equation of that line, right? So what a linear regression does is that it uses those points, um, and then it gives you a equation of a line that goes through those points, right? So and sometimes let's say you have 2 comma 9 instead, right? Not all the points are actually going to line the line, but it gives you like the best estimate, right, of a line um, that tries to go through most of those points as possible, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. Again, right, if you have 3 given points, and let's say you're trying to find the equation of a line, well, you can make a table, you can type in linear regression, and it'll give you the equation right here, right? Y equals 3x plus 2. So that's just, again, another thing that Desmos can do, which is pretty cool. And of course, right, you can add more points if you want to. Pretty sure you can add as much as you want. But I don't think you really need to use more than 4 points for any SAT problem specifically, right? So um, finally, right, we have actually I'll go over something else, and this is the second to last thing, which is has to do with angle mode, right? So sometimes you're going to come across trigonometry questions um, that may use degrees or radians, right? So what you can do is first match your calculator setting to the unit before evaluating a trigonometric expression, right? So for example, right, if you're given an angle that's written as 30 degrees, and again, this is a really basic problem. I doubt they're going to ask something so simple. Um, but let's say you have an angle um, and it's given in degrees, right? So what you're going to do is go to the top right, click on that icon of a wrench, and then change your mode from radians, right, to degrees, right? So now what that allows you to do is if you're trying to find like sine of 30, right? Well, that's pretty simple, right? You can just type in sine of 30 and it will give you 0.5, right? Again, that's pretty much something you should already know, right? Sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. But if you just want to check, right? Or if you forgot, again, just make sure you change it to degrees, and then type in your trigonometric expression. It will give you the value. So, common mistake is that you change the mode of the calculator because a result looks unfamiliar, right? Instead of checking whether the question uses degrees or radians, right? So you should always check what the question is using first, before deciding what setting your calculator should be on, right? And then after that, of course, you can proceed and solve the problem. So now, right, the last thing I'm going to cover is a very specific type of question. But let's say you have a quadratic expression given, and I'll say it's x squared minus 5x equals 14, right? Or this type of equation, right? And you're trying to find the positive solution. What do you do in this case? Let me first enter the graph, right? The home button. Okay, so if you're trying to find a positive solution, well, you notice there's two vertical lines here, and this first vertical line, as you see, goes through -2, right? The second one here, right, goes through 7. So of course, our positive solution here is going to be 7, right? So anytime you have an equation and you're trying to find a solution, right? Trying to find the positive solution, just literally enter it into Desmos, look at which line is actually a positive, lies on the positive side. Uh, Click on the point where it intersects with the x-axis, and it's going to give you what that solution is. In this case, that positive solution is x equals 7, right? So again, I think these are really, really useful things to know, right? Especially for moments when you want to save as much as time possible, right? But that is pretty much it for this specific lesson. Because I'm just gonna, this is just specifically to introduce you to Desmos, right? And it is again one of the biggest advantages you could have on the SAT. You can literally solve equations and systems, reveal important points. You can evaluate functions, all right? You can organize data. Um, and you can also test answer choices, which is actually a really powerful thing also, right? You can complete awkward calculations, right? Now, that does not mean you should always use Desmos, right? You should, uh, for example, when you have another method, right? For example, mental math, right? A quick calculation that you can do easily without you having to use Desmos, right? A shortcut or a trick that you see right away, right? You don't have to use Desmos for that. Um, Sometimes when your exact work is clear, right? So you can, like when you see a problem and you can just do it manually instead of using Desmos, right? Wherever you feel that way, right? So, and the other thing to consider is that typing uh, costs more time, right? Like entering very, very long equations into Desmos, it does take more time, right? When you might have to just use a pattern or trick that you haven't realized, right? So Desmos is not always the best case, the best thing to use, right? But you should use it when you're trying to we should use it when you're trying to do an equation or a system, finding a specific intersection. And I'm going to go over all those things in future lessons. But that's it for this video. I just wanted to introduce you to the very basics of how Desmos works, right? Um, and hopefully you gain a better understanding of how to actually use it for specific questions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.